Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3, on page 1290. So yesterday we continued the discussion around Gevuris, which can be translated as severities, judgments, intensity, as we've learned, and that there's two poles, two extremes, Gevuris koshes, what he called harsh judgments, harsh severities, that refers to both below people who just are murderous and sadistic and cruel by nature, the different levels that we learned about that. And the other end of the spectrum, Gevuris Mumutokes, sweetened severities, you could call sweetened Gevuris, sweetened judgments, which are the opposite, passionate and intense love, Gevuris Shebechesed, that's fiery and passionate and directed toward the positive ends, as we learned, both in love and in kindness, which therefore does not dissipate, as we learned on page 1289. In the last paragraph, he explained, he took it further, that these Gevuris Shebechesed, Gevuris Mumutokes, in addition to it intensifying the chesed, the love, it also elicits from the makabel, from the recipient, a response, like the words from the heart enter the heart. So it awakens a love and a desire and a yearning, also in the recipient. And which what that means in Avodah or Lamayla would be that Knesset Yisrael Malchus gets awakened with a profound tshuva at certain times when, in response to when there's an awakening from above, when the lion roars from above, like during midnight, that in turn, the Arya Shag is the Gevuris Shebechesed, and that awakens the soul on its own, would not necessarily have that type of stimulation, and because it would be limited in its own place, so the Neshamas and Biyah are now stimulated to rise and elevate toward Atzilus. And the same thing, Rosh Hashanah, Yom and Aseret Yimei Tshuva, Aryeh Shag, the lion roaring, Aryeh is the acronym for Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and this is the Severities Tshuva that causes, because there's this awakening from above, the Kiruv HaMoyer El Anitzvos, that the source gets close to the spark, to the soul, therefore it creates that intense love in return of the souls reaching and doing tshuva from love and so on. And with this he explained Yaakov. This is the work that Yaakov did with the sheep, the breeding of the sheep, where he peeled the barks of the branches. And as we discussed from the verse, he didn't just peel it off completely. From the verse it's very clear, and as Rashi explains, that he peeled parts of it. So he left, so to speak, a combination of almost like a colorful type of combination of red and white, which in turn he placed in the water there where the sheep came to feed, to drink, which affected how they would breed. So he says, what is this in Avodah? The red and the white represents the Gevuris Shebechesed, the idea of awakening and stimulating in the sheep, in this case would be like the neshamas, this element of profound love, but not just profound, intense love, that would cause it to breed, that the neshama should produce, like he says, Heloda and Ashpa. That was the purpose of this exercise. Okay, I'd say, like, just use the words. He peeled the branches or the rounds. Which encompasses both red and white. As I probably mentioned, the bark most likely was more reddish, and when you peel, there was the white underneath it, like in any bark, in any branch. So he says. And those are the different items that he used. I looked it up a bit in the commentaries. The Makel of Lach Luz Armin the different ones, they ultimately are some do comment that they are reddish in color. So it's reddish white. And that's B'chinas HaChesed Shekol Megvura Dafke. Chesed, as it's encompassed Dafke from Gvura, because it's Gvura that creates the intensity. Kedei Lachamim Hatzein, in order to warm and to stimulate the sheep, Shein HaNeshomis, Le'ele B'hem Ha'ava V'Hatshuka, the souls to awaken and stimulate, arouse within them the love and the yearning and the desire, Lalis U'Lisyachid Liz B'hem Hetul D'Vashpa, to rise and to be united, that they should, and that ultimately causing Tulda offspring, a birthing, and Ashpa, meaning that from this should come a transmission. And that's what he says later in the verse. If you look in Vayetze, he actually uses the word Hatsein HaMukusharis. Mukusharis is referring to the concept of being bound, kasher. Being bound, which is the breeding of the sheep and Aveda, this connection that creates the birth. And what it says, I actually looked it up. Let me just tell you my findings on that. Kshurim Liyakov is a mimer. Let me just see what I saw. 1 minute. Yeah. The Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe, he speaks about that, Kshurim Liyakov, in the context of creating a union, a yichud. Not really relevant to details. The Kol Zeh, we concluded, and all this is the Gvuris V'Mutakis. So in addition to what he said in the previous paragraph, the sweetened Gvuris, the sweetened judgments, is the intensity of love, which is connected to a love that is unceasing and forever, as we discussed in the previous paragraph. So because it creates that intensity, it's not a cold-blooded love, but a warm and hot-blooded one. So now also the impact on the makabel, the arousing and the stimulation of the makabel. Okay, but then we went to the next paragraph. Now comes the question, and I'll sum up what we learned yesterday. We learned both yesterday. We continued learning yesterday. So now all this just intensifies the question. So how's there the leap from one extreme to the next? The whole piece began on page 1288, when he began talking about the idea of Avaya Yechatu Meriva, the elimination, the annihilation, and of the opponents. What he called Bnei Elikim, that challenged the compassion of Avaya. And then through the responses, Avaya Yechatu Meriva, this response of Rosh Hashanah is the Rotkir Shefer that eliminates that challenge. He said from that evolves Gvuras Koshes of the Satan. That's Gvuras, you could say, Gvura of Gedusha is challenging the Din, and Gvura of Rosh Hashanah is challenging the Rachamim of Avaya. But he said also from that evolves, when you medagdig b'yesa kol ha'mesiv gereya, he said, when you go very meticulous, it also from that can evolve the Satan, which is the Gvuras Koshes. And as he explained in the next paragraph on page 1288, just to refresh our memories, that Reisha de Esav ba'atvi de Yitzchak, that the head of Esav, which is the Keser of Klippa, of Gvuras Koshes, is ba'atvi, is rooted in the bosom of Yitzchak, of Gvura de Kedusha. Now that we explained what Gvura of Kedusha is, the holy Gvura, Gvuras V'Mutakis, which is discussed in the last page, the Fizayin move ma'achad the Gvuras Shvechesed Shikar Gvuras V'Mutakis Nivdal V'Naila B'Heper Gomu. Because Gvuras Derad the Klippas Nekla Shenikra Gvuras Koshes, since they're so distant, diametric opposite of the severe judgments, which are so negative and destructive, so how do you say that from the Gvura of Yitzchak, from Kedusha, from holiness, comes the Gvura of Esau, which is the exact opposite? So the inyan that he explained, and let's just sum up what we learned, is that they both come from the same cause. The bottom line, they come from cause. They come from the Siba Achas. What's the Siba Achas? Chem Hativi. They come from the natural passion and warmth. that's beretichas in the boiling blood or in the bubbly blood. However, this passion, this heat, so to speak, can go in two directions. It encompasses a paradox, something and its opposite, and they're interdependent, as we're going to learn. So what do we learn so far? So he says, the warmth and the passion that comes in love and chesed, that's the gvura shebechesed. We're talking now the positive one. As we learned before, this, on the contrary, it's not just regular love, it creates an intense, incessant flow of love, b'chayis rav, with tremendous energy and vitality, and a power and koyach otzum shaboy. Kana. Now, this same type of energy, this same type of passion, directed in the opposite direction, who? Atzmei, kishaboli, de kasber tichas dom chem godel. This same passion, if it's only channeled toward the opposite direction, toward anger, but a tichas chem, a raging anger with a type of what did I say before? A boiling rage. So that will cause yirzach a yipul b'tayvara. It can cause that a person should murder and kill another person, or he should fall into a very bad taiva, very bad lust and temptation, just like an animal. So passion, basically, he doesn't say these words. You can say is a personality type. It's an archetype. You can also say it's even neutral, even though in the root it's not neutral, it's holy. But for all practical purposes, it can go two different directions. A passionate person can be passionate in love and in kindness, but it can also be a passionate, angry person if it goes in the opposite direction. And then he gave the example, the dugma lezeh hu hayayin. Yayin is gvura. Yayin is not just like water. Yayin has strength, and it affects us in that way. It affects us. It stimulates our senses, makes a person a lot more acutely passionate about things. So he says, the good within its so-called passion and warmth and the stimulation it creates, that will cause that a person do a lot more kindness, more than the regular. When a person is so-called, doesn't say intoxicated necessarily, but his wine has affected him. So it's going to cause him to be far more benevolent and kind and loving. But there's also the other side of the chaim. That same heat, that same passion, can be stimulates even to the point of retzicha. And he brings Rabbi, the Shachtel the Rab Zera, and Purim, that says Chayvin Shlipsuma, and Rabbi then they drank, and Rabbi then rose and shechted Rab Zera. That's the way the Gemara puts it. I noticed in the Tofresh Beit Tez, they bring I mentioned yesterday, the Frierdiker Rebbe does not bring this piece, including the parentheses afterwards. However, in the footnote, they do mention that in Ayin Beis it's brought, and says that Ayin Beis, it's a different explanation than the Rebbe Sicha that I mentioned, where he talks about the positive context. So here he's talking about the literal interpretation, which still needs explanation. How did Rabbi do that? But the point is, he's bringing an example of what wine can ultimately achieve. And at the end of the day, Rabbi Zera, the next year on Purim, when Rabbi offered, even though Rabbi then did Tchias HaMeis, he brought him back to life. He brought Rabbi Zera back to life. So the next year when it came Purim, Rabbi asked Rabbi Zera again, let's go for a breng again. Let's drink. And Rabbi Zera said, no. Lav kol yom yisachish nissen. Not every day miracles happen. In other words, he wasn't ready to engage again, even though it then ended up that he was revived, but he didn't. So you see from that, and a very literal. The Rebbe has, as I said, a deeper explanation. But for practical purposes, relevant to us here, it's an example for the opposite effect of wine, what wine can do. And the parentheses, he brings the Chet Eitzadas, according to one opinion. It was a yayin, it was geffen, it was a vine. So it says, Eshkel shano b'sochtalei. That...
Is it skipping it in Peites?
he skips both these. He takes out both these, both the Shachtel Rab Zera and the Eshkel Shalanovim. Both are not in that pay test. Whatever reason, just telling you. So Eshkel Shalanovim Sachtelei, that she took a cluster of grapes that she squeezed for him, and that was the wine. So he says, like it says elsewhere. He doesn't go into any details, but clearly he's bringing it most likely for the negative, because it was eating from the Chetei Das, which was not appropriate, even though it does say in Svarim that had they waited a few hours, the Rebbe brings this a number of times, till Shabbos, they would have been able to make Kiddush on that wine from the Eitz Das. The problem was they didn't wait. Okay. And that's where we stopped. So we have now, we still haven't finished the subject. So we have now these two channels that both, he says, come Siba Achas, but this Siba Achas is called from two opposites. It can go in this direction and then it creates tremendous intense love and kindness, or in this direction it can cause murder and indulgences and hedonistic behavior. As we see, Yayin, Nichnas Yayin Yotze Sod, for a person who's a high-level person, Yayin will bring out his deepest pnimius. We saw the Rebbe, Purim Tov Shechai, other times, where the Rebbe drank some L'chaim, and it fed, what was the result? Unbelievable Giluyim, deeper ideas of Chassidus, and just in general, because what you are becomes deeper and more revealed. Unfortunately, the other extreme, someone can drink wine, and it affects the opposite. That brings out from them is their worst. To the point, like he said here. So bottom line is, it can go both directions. But let's continue. There's more to say on this topic. He says like this. So we have the concept in Gemara, a Talmud Chacham, the anger of a Talmud Chacham, chivya. The Rabbanon means the wrath of the teachers, of the sages. So we have such
snake, nachash.
Yeah, but I'm saying, why is it called nachash? It's because it's like the wrath, like the point, like the sum of the toxins. I just want to see in Tafresh Peites, he brings all this, he brings all the sources. So let me just see what he says here. Because this he does bring in Tafresh Peites. By the way, in the Tafresh Peites, by the wine, he says that you see a person who drink, he's mekarev l'chol afilu l'seinei. This is the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe adds a few things.
What? Is what?
I'm going to explain. Be patient, please.
I didn't hear the word.
There's a whole group of people. I'm going to explain it to everybody. Just give me a moment. So he says like this. He adds after he says about which is the expression in Ayin Beis, and that's the good when wine. But he says, he actually says the words Hayayin shegoydem chem. Here the Rebbe Rashab just says Hayayin shatev shebechem. In other words, yayin that causes passion. He has that word goydem. Then he adds and says like this. So it causes a person to give more than the regular. Like we actually see, this is what he adds. The oz mekarev l'chol afil l'seinei. He brings he's mekarev everyone. He brings everybody close, even someone that is his enemy. When a person is in a state of heightened state due to wine. And he reveals all the depths of his heart. The yitin kol hashaloi ba'ava v'chibi yiseda v'divrei ava. And he gives, he's magnanimous. He gives with a stretched out hand, with great love, and with loving words. That's what he just adds. We learned something like this earlier when we talked about simcha, which is of course connected and simcha lebiyayin. Okay, now comes the other side, and it comes the other side. So now the vahara causes, like he says, the sikha, And interesting, he also deletes the words "oy yipul b'tayvera." What's it? No, my mistake. No. He doesn't. That correcting. He doesn't do that. That's earlier. He does say it. Okay, but now comes the kas shel Talmid Chacham. He does bring that. The kas shel Talmid Chacham. Chivid Rabbanon. The Gemara is Shabbos 110a and Avodah Zarah 27b. That's the place where we have about the Chivid Rabbanon, which is like the anger or the wrath of the Chivid Rabbanon as they become upset about something. Ukamoi, we have another Gemara that says, Nosen Eina B'V'Nasagal. So this is a story, I believe, about Rashbi, and maybe another Talmid Chacham as well, who looked at a corrupt situation, or people who were very involved in pettiness. He looked at it, and that alone, because he was so upset by it, it turned it into a heap. A gal is like a mound, which in other words, it destroyed it. This is why the Eibishter told Rashbi, we're going to learn about it shortly, that you're not ready to come out from the cave. After 12 years of being in the Maira with Rabbi Lozer, so Rashbi was such in a spiritual state, whatever he looked at began to be, he looked at the pettiness and the nonsense that people are involved in, he was causing it to be destroyed. I believe that's the Gemara in Shabbos that he's quoting. But regardless, that's the point. That's why Rashbi was told you have to go back a 13th year. And then when he came out, whatever he looked at, he corrected. If something was not perfect, he perfected it. He improved it. So bottom line, we see from this that there's an element of kas and anger that it causes destruction, even coming from a Talmid Chacham. We're not talking here about from the Satan or any the negative destructive forces. So you see here a negative thing. Ukiyadua, the Inyan. Shubchin is Buddhist cautious. Interesting. One second. In Tofresh Peites, he elaborates more. Let's read an Ayin Beis and then I'll go back to that. So he says, Ukiyadua be'inyan nechasha necheshes.
Where in Tofresh Peites? Where is it?
It's posted on the group. Rabbi Yitzchak posted it a few days ago. Okay. Ukiyadua be'inyan nechasha necheshes. As we know, the Inyan of Nechasha Necheshes, which was the image of a serpent, the Pasha Chukas, that Moshe Rabbeinu created to heal them from the Magefa, that epidemic that struck them. So what do we learn there? So he used the Nechasha Necheshes. It was like a type of homeopathy, using the negative to heal from the negative. So he says the B'chinas Katnus the Nochash. When you talk about the serpent, so serpent represents toxic. Like you see, the story of the serpent in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, was an enemy. Nochash was like the Satan, or the Yetzer Hara. And it came to incite Adam and Chava to defy God's command. So the Nochash, and then afterwards you see the punishment of the Nochash becomes the mortal enemy of the human being. Because the Nochash represents the negative some the toxins. So he says in the Nochash you have Katnus HaNochash, B'chinas Gvuras Koshes. Katnus the Nochash, which means when it's in a diminished state. We're not talking about the root of the Nochash in a holy place. In a diminished state, B'chinas Gvuras Koshes. It's severe, it's harsh severities. Harsh judgments. The only thing is, it can be dressed up in Kedusha. So even though the very anger or the very negative energy is coming from a harsh Gvuradika place, it could also come and be Melubish in Kedusha. In a case where a Talmid Chacham, who's a refined person, has wrath and anger, charein on what? Al Eved Ratzon Hashem. He sees someone who transgresses against God, defies God's will, and that causes him to become very angry. It's not coming from a bad place where he's an evil person. We learned before that you have, let's say, you can have an evil person who simply by nature tortures others, is a sadist. Or the other level, the next level, someone who is always there to punish someone when there's something is done wrong. Or more subtle, someone who's always looking with a negative, judgmental and a negative eye. Here we're talking about a Talmid Chacham. It's coming for a good reason. However, it's manifesting in a negative way, in anger. So the bottom line is, it's coming from a shmelubish b'kedusha v'kavanose l'shem shemayim, and the intention of his is l'shem shemayim. Mamish, not like mamish. He actually means it l'shem shemayim. Acha poil b'klalose. I'm sorry, mamish shenegelo yadover ma'id, because it really bothers him. So this Talmid Chacham, when he sees this, or the Nasa Begal, Nasa Einov Be, Vanasa Gal, he's coming from a place that truly and sincerely bothers him. Not like we learned on page 1288 that he says it's L'Shem Shamayim. He dresses it up as if he's protecting God's interest, when in fact, it's not inside Yiras Shamayim. As he said there, because you see people who have Yiras Shamayim much more than him, don't get upset. We learned on page 1288. That's coming from a bad place. Here it's coming from a good place. It's Negele, Benefesh. Negele, not Benefesh, he says. Hadover Ma'ed, it very much impacts him, affects him. V'lei be'efin kanal, b'madrega shebara, where it's completely coming from his sadism, and he's just dressing it up as if it's coming from a holy place. Here it is coming from a holy place. And nevertheless, it manifests not in kindness, but in hubchinas gvura mamish. Nevertheless, it's mamish gvura, because he's got angry and he's causing damage. Acha pel b'klalose, till the point that he can affect something with his curse. If this Talmid Chacham utters a negative curse in this situation, he can have an impact. So we're not just talking about in his heart he feels angry. He can actually cause damage. Or even without cursing, just by looking at it, like we just learned from the Gemara. So let's just analyze what he's saying here. He's adding another element here that we haven't learned about till now. Till now, we learned either it's negative gvuras that are completely or almost completely about negative stuff, destructive, like we learned on page 1288, or we learned about gvuras mamatokis that are intense love and intense kindness. Now that he's connecting and saying that there's a connection because both come from this passionate place, the Chem Hativi, he's adding now another element, that it could be something that's not passionate kindness, it's passionate anger, but it's coming from the root of it is a good place. However, it's manifesting in a negative way. So you really have three scenarios here. Gvuras koshes mamish, like the nachash, that's literally completely negative and destructive. You have a gvura mamish, like this case, where damage could be done. And maybe that explains Rabba and Rabzeda. That really means that it's coming from the bad place. It came from a good intention. But bottom line is he killed him and affects him in a negative way. And then you have Guras Mamatakas, which is completely the opposite, with intense love and intense kindness.
Rabbi and Rabbi is still not clear.
Okay.
Still not clear.
We're in the middle of learning. So let's continue learning and let's see what he's going to say. And then we'll discuss. Anyway, so okay. B'kol mokim, even though it's coming from Yiras Shamayim and it's coming from Kedusha, like he says, it's coming from a lubish b'Kedusha. It's now this gvura, this anger, is an anger from a holy type of anger, but nevertheless, it is gvura mamish. It's not chesed. This is not gvura sheba chesed. Ach sharshay. However, the root of it, mibchin, is gvura sheba chesed dafka. The root of this behavior, even this gvura mamish, is rooted in gvura sheba chesed, u'kamosh anu royim, like we see Shekol misha veidase bekedesh betfila. Every person, anyone who's aveda sase bekedesh betfila, meaning his holy work in davening, bislavas ava derish be'esh yeser, the more passionate he is with the flaming fire of his love during davening, the more angry he'll become on someone who defies what God wants. The word Eisa means most likely Eisa Kneged Ratzon Hashem. I just want to see in I'll read it in a minute in Tofresh Peites. It's a little clearer, the language there, but let me see what he says. Ala Eisa Leitov, he adds. Here, he just says Ala Eisa. But the Tofresh Peites, Ana Eisa Leitov, as someone who does not good. Ukamoi, Mishalhuva Derichimusa, like we learned before, Shalhuvusa Derichimusa, we learned on the previous page. That's the flaming fire, the torch of love. So he says, so like we say from the torch of love, Yava Yesra Kasala, that will cause more anger on someone that is Menea, that is trying to impede the love. Like it says elsewhere in the Zohar, the kad arye var yusem mizdavge ve leman de over benayu. Like the lion and the lioness that are joined together. I'm not sure ve leman de over benayu. I have to look up what the Zohar is. Let me just see something here.
If somebody is trying to cross among them when they are together.
Oh, vei. Ochen vei, basically. Okay, that's good, right. When a lion and a lioness are joining together, are uniting together, so vei leman da over benayo. It's alas or woe to someone who's trying to get in between them.
Don't try to do it.
In other words, it's their passionate love that will cause also tremendous anger if somebody tries to stop them from connecting. Someone not stops them. Someone is interrupting their union, their zivug. Yeah. And I see, okay, I'll look this up. This is in some different modern that explains this. So that's what he says here. So now we've added yet another dimension. So there's Gvuras Kashis that are completely negative. Now we've talked about something of a natural passion, that the Talmud Chacham could have a natural passion and love and kindly love people in the most passionate way. However, it can also go in the other direction. That it could turn toward anger, but it could be an anger that's not Kedusha. Here is one that's coming from Shem Shamayim, but it's still Gvura, and that too is rooted in the Gvura Sheba Chesed. Why? Like he gave the example, because the more someone loves God, the more they despise the opposite. This is actually in Tanya. I'm not sure why he doesn't bring Tanya Perek Yud. He says that explicitly there. That's the Tzaddik Gomor, because he's completely connected in love. So anything opposite of godliness, automatically, he says, son of Sinis, he completely despises. I'm just saying, maybe because there the word is sinna, here is he wants to use the word gvura. Regardless, what he did connect now is that you see that this anger comes from the Talmud Chacham, which is in Kedusha, and Shem Shamayim is rooted not because he's angry, it's not because he's an angry person, or because he's a cruel person by nature, or all the other a sadist, is because of his love for God is so deep. That's why he cannot tolerate something the opposite, and that's what causes his anger. So even though the anger itself can cause damage, but it's rooted in Gvura Sheba Chesed, in the Gvura Sheba Chesed, in the intense love for godliness. That's what he added now.
Possible to ask a question?
And from there, I'm in the middle of teaching, and as I said many times, let me finish, and then I'll take questions. And from all this was understood how the harsh severities, the harsh judgments, boim, come from, derive from, and they evolve from the gvuris of Gedusha. Now, the question still remains, in my mind at least, what about the gvuris kashis of the Satan that's driven by negativity? We understand from here how gvuris kashis in Gedusha come from gvuris, how gvuris kashis, like here the Talmud Chacham comes from that law. But how does it spill over to the people who are evil and sadistic and angry, or even Esav, which is gvura gedusha of destruction? So you have to say that once you see a connection between the passion, because you said it all came from passion, since passion itself is coming from a very high place, the gvuras of chesed, which is tremendous love, an intense love like fire, and that can turn into a passion like an Talmud Chacham toward being upset and angry and even cursing or looking at something and causing damage to it, which is opposite of God, that from that evolves also, the next step would be, it evolves into Gvuras Koshes of real evil, like we described before, Ra Gomur. That's what you have to say he's saying, even though he doesn't say it explicitly. That's why I want to look at Tafresh Peites before we continue here. Let me just see how he explains it here. So I'm going to read from Tafresh Peites, and then we'll stop here and I'll take any questions. Okay.
What page are in Tafresh Peites? What page are you on?
32. Okay. So he says the same idea. We learned this inside. This is the actual language from Ayin Beis. Shubchin is gvuris koshes, rak shemelubes begedusha. It's gvuris koshes, it's harsh severity. But it's manifest in holiness. Lies ma'oid b'charein ala ever rotzen havaya, being very wrathful and angry on someone who transgressed and defied the rotzen havaya, the rotzen of God's will. The kavanos l'shem shemayim, and his intention is for heaven's sake. So in other words, it's not coming from sadism or anger. Shenegela adover ma'id, that it very much negates him, it very much affects him. Kaha, he adds now that Rav Sheshes imatzduki, like the story with Rav Sheshes and the tzduki, the saddest shalaglig al divrei chachamim. The tzdukim were those that they did not accept the oral Torah. So there's a story. So there's yeah. So there's a story of Rav Sheshes. There was this tzduki who mocked and laughed at the words of the chachamim, v'hanagosam, and their behavior. So I correct myself. That's not the nasa gal shel atzomis is. Let me see something 2:16. It's brought several times in the Gemara. No, so it's brought several times in the Gemara, but that's the real story. Rav Sheshes looked at him, and he became a pile. He became a heap of rubble, basically, a heap of bones. He literally killed him because he was laughing and mocking at the Divrei Chachamim. So what do you see from this? That it's coming from Shem Shamayim, because he was laughing at Torah. We're not talking about someone who's a sadist. We're talking about a Talmud Chacham. And nevertheless, it's still Gvura Mamish, even though it's coming L'Shem Shamayim, to the point that he affects with his curse or with his eyes, with looking at him, his gaze. With his gaze. So this is the Ayin Beis with some additions. However, the root of this is from Gvura Shebechesed, not Gvura Mamish, but Gvura Shebechesed. As we see, Shekol Misha Vedose B'Kedush B'Tfila, the exact language from Ayin Beis. As we see, anyone whose holy service in davening, B'Slavas Ava B'Rish B'Eish Yeser, with more intensity and fiery flames of love, In direct proportion to that, he'll be angry. He'll be angry at someone that does no good. Like we see the flame, the torch of love. Through that comes greater anger on anyone that tries to impede or stop that stop that love. Here he doesn't bring the story with the Zohar, the footnote. He also deletes that piece. Can everyone please put on silent until? Okay. And from all this we understood. Okay, he doesn't add anything actually to explain it. He did add a few lines, but he doesn't add anything. He just says from Gvuras Koshes boy mishtashim b'chinas gvura. So Gvuras Koshes is also the Gvura of Rav Sheshes, or the Gvura of a Talmid Chacham that has anger. That's also coming from there. But so we see how that's rooted in the Gvuras Kedushes, the Gvura Kedusha of Gvura Shebechesed, because it's coming from a passionate place. So still we have to understand how does that evolve into Atva Resha de Esav, but it does. 1 second. I guess you'd say also that once there's a Gvura Kedusha that's very intense, to the point that you could actually cause someone to become a heap of bones, that once you have that, then it's easier to understand how that can evolve into a Gvura Kedusha, Gvuras Koshes of the very negative sort. I need to think about it some more, but that's what. So he finishes here as well. The end of the paragraph.
I think he's talking about.
Okay, 1 second. So now let me. One second. So that concludes this piece. It's not over yet, and I think we'll understand more in the next paragraph because we're going to go back to Havai Yechat Meriva. Right. However, he did cover these different angles here. Okay, I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything or comment.
According to this. Even this is called Gvura Shebechesed, but this is not good because, like you said with Rashbi, that yes.
Are you asking a question or are you making a comment?
It's a question. I want you to explain.
What the question that I just asked? I just asked the question.
No.
How does that explain Gvuras Koshes from the Ummah?
This is
okay. What's your question?
My question is: we see by the Rabbi and all the Rabbeim when they took the Nesius. They made a condition that it should be b'chesed u'berachamim, should not have any negative effect. This is called tigboires hachasodim, but still, it's not a good thing, looks like, right? So explain it.
Who said that's not a good thing?
Who said it's not a good thing? You see that all the Rabbeim and the Rabbi,
what's that? Intense love is, why is that not a good thing?
Love is good, but
I don't understand what's up. What?
I'm talking about Kpeido, the Rabbeim.
Well, you didn't mention that. You just said that the Rabbeim, when they took the leadership, it was b'chesed u'berachamim.
They
so
asked, but if
why do you need a question? Why do you need to ask from the Rebbe? They're Gemaras. He just brought a Gemara, Rab Sheshes. He brought Talmid Chacham Shekas. He's saying it very clearly that there's a situation where Talmid Chacham gets angry.
I am asking the Rebbe. I'm not. One second. I'm not. He asks this question and he's answering it here. He says we have a situation where the chaim, the passionate love for God, causes that same person to be passionately angry against someone that defies God. It's coming from the same root, he says. But b'poel mamish, the Gvura Shebechesed is manifests in tremendous kindness. And Gvuras Koshes, even the Kedusha, Melubish B'Kedusha, manifests in actually causing damage. Like he said with Rab Sheshes. So that's what he says here. So what's your question? So my question is, what is the right way? How this Gvuras Amitiyah?
You're asking, are you asking whether Rab Sheshes did the right thing?
No. What does Hashem wants from us? We see by the
I'm asking you. Let's start with Rab Sheshes. Did he do the right thing or did he not do the right thing? You have an answer to that question?
this is my. I'm not talking about Rav Sheshes.
I'm talking about it because that's
okay. So this is my question. This is what the Eibishter wants from us. This is my question.
Forget about us. Rav Sheshes did the right thing, or did he not do the right thing?
You're putting me on the spot. I don't know.
Your question will be answered. With all respect, your question will be answered after you answer my question, because that's what he's talking about in the Mimer here. I'm not going to jump to talk about us until we understand what it says in the Mimer. I know you want to go there, but he's talking about Talmid Chacham that gets angry. He talked about Nosem Be'enov. He gazed at him and caused him to become a pile of bones. He talked about Shachtel Rab Zera in a negative way. He killed him when he drank. And he calls all this not Tagbeirus HaChesed. Chesed is a tremendous amount of love, that when a person drinks wine and is very abundant love, more than regular. We're talking now that it's manifest in the negative. And he explained that even though it's coming from L'Shem Shamayim, it still manifests in Gvura Koshes. He says it clear, Gvura Mamish. The Frierdiker Rebbe even has the word Gvuras Koshes, uses that word, I believe. And yet it's rooted in Gvura Sheba Chesed, because the reason he has such a passion and the negative is coming because he loves God so much. That's what he's saying here. So my understanding is that it is appropriate. And that's why you find at times that Talmidei Chachamim, including the Rebbe and others, did get upset and angry. Whether it caused damage or not is another story. You know, a Rebbe getting upset. But the Gemara for sure, so there's no question, there's a time for that. Now you're asking whether you can do that. I don't think you're on the level of Rav Sheshes. If you get angry, it could be your own nature, like he said before. So we're learning a mimer here. Before we understand how we apply it to ourselves, we have to understand the mimer. In the mimer we discussed so far, and I want to stick to the mimer right now, not lessons to us. The mimer says there was definitely a scenario where there are people who are sadistic and cruel in nature. We learned that. Lamaila too, there are malochei ra. He called them bad malochim, malochim roim. He called that gvuras koshes. He said it's rooted in the Sultan, which is also in very harsh severities. He said horrible words. They cause damage, they destroy, they're destructive. It's all rooted, he said, from Esav. That we know. And he said people who say, I'm doing it because of Kedusha and Hashem Shemayim, it's not true. That's just a masquerade. That's it's false. He said that also clearly. Then we have the other extreme. You have Gvuras, Kedusha, intense tagberis of kindness and love that we learned at length. And now he's saying, so how do you explain how one comes from the other? So he said, because the root comes from passion. And passion can go both directions. In Kedusha, it could also go both directions. The same person who loves God so much will also be angrier at someone who goes against God. Someone who doesn't love God so much is not going to be as angry. So the passion of anger, or the passion that is driving these examples he gave, is coming from the same root as the passion of love for God and Aveh Chesed and kindness. Same place. That's what he says here. So for them, absolutely, this is a case. Now, the truth is Rashbi was told to go back into the Maida because obviously L'Shevis Yitzhak, God wants this world to be healed, not to be destroyed, even though he had a good reason because he saw things that were terrible. But generally speaking, that's not the approach in Yiddishkeit. Now, I believe this is going to be discussed in the next section, in the next page. He's going to actually talk about Rashbi. Is it appropriate what they did? You could say it's appropriate that it's coming from a holy place, but should Rav Sheshes have actually turned him into a Gal Shel Atzomas, or should he have maybe learned with him and turn him and do tshuva that he shouldn't be at Tzduki? You can make that argument. But the bottom line is we do have here Gvuras Koshes, harsh severities that are coming from a holy place, but they're manifesting in a negative way. That's what he's saying here in this Maimer so far. I still stay by the question I'm asking, how does that jump to Gvuras Koshes that are mamish negative, that have nothing to do with any Kedusha, or at least not in an ostensible way, to maybe rooted. So I'm suggesting maybe once a Talmid Chacham could be angry, even though it's for a good reason, maybe from that could evolve an anger by another person who's not a Talmid Chacham, and that would be inappropriate. That may be the explanation, but I'll tell you something. Since he's still in the middle of the subject, I don't want to say anything definitive. I see the next paragraph is going to continue to discuss it. So I would, for myself at least, and I strongly suggest, let's hold our anything conclusive. Let's keep patient and see how he's going to further explain it. And then we'll see what's left, if anything's left that's not understood. I am sure that Rebbe Rashab himself was sensitive to this issue. He's asking the questions. We're in the middle of his mimer, and I'm confident that we'll get the picture clear. But that's what we've learned so far. And that's why I want to keep it focused, and I don't want to digress in any particular way, because that just creates more confusion. To me, the most important thing is what I just said. We have to learn what it says here, try to understand it before we apply it or before we overanalyze it. So that's so far what we've learned.
Thank you, Steven. I'm happy that you mentioned the thing with Rabbi, that he told him to come back. It needs an explanation.
Yeah, but we haven't finished learning. I am not going to talk about, he's going to talk about this. So why do we have to rush? We'll learn it inside, and that's all.
Okay. There was Meir Wilner in Israel. He was a communist.
Well, I don't want to go there. This is not appropriate right now to start talking about stories of Avis Yisrael.
You never told somebody.
It's not appropriate to talk about because it's not. We will talk about that.
Fine.
Because you're going to confuse people. You start talking about all the stories of Avis Yisrael, then did the Rapshashas not have Avis Yisrael to the Zduki? Is that what you want to make the case?
No. Okay.
So that's why let's be patient. Let's see how he's going to explain it. And then I know the story. I can give you now 30 stories of Avis Yisrael, even to the Shoyim. And why didn't what? But there's also stories of anger. We also know that Rabbi got angry. Let's not dismiss that either.
The Rabbi was very careful. The Rabbi always said, when he said something hard, today Simchas Torah, it's one damage. Today Shabbos, it's one damage. Right away, when the Rabbi said something
so why do we have all these stories of Rabbeim that had Kpedus that caused damage to people?
Not Rabbeim of Chabad.
It's not correct. The Mittler Rebbe had a Kpeda on the two brothers, and they lost their the Gadlus.
That's a different thing. That's Nagia Be'etzem HaMalchus.
Okay, so you have an excuse. So what are you saying? That Rapshashas is on the level of the Rabbeim?
No.
I'm not sure.
What are you trying to... I didn't say anything.
Since I'm the teacher here, you're confusing people and myself by bringing these stories because it seems to contradict what he says here. What are you trying to say? That what he says right now, he's explaining a certain idea. Let's continue learning, and when we finish learning, we'll discuss it. I'm not going to go there right now. I don't want to go there. I'm not sure why you're insisting when I'm suggesting it's going to just confuse matters. Explain to me.
I understand. I have two easy questions. Armoin.
So let's see if anybody else has questions.
No. This is
I have a question.
One second. Please give me a second. Please. Armoin.
No. I ask you now to exercise some discipline because you're pushing yourself. There are people. There are other people.
I hold myself back for half an hour for this. This is the second. Armoin, he said before with the Aleph. Maybe it's a printing mistake. You remember?
I already said it yesterday. So why are you repeating what I said?
No, it's a printing mistake, could be.
Didn't I spoke about this yesterday.
Okay. And bosom is a word in English or it's in Yiddish? Fegelach and bosom.
Where is it here in this mimer?
No, you said about before, we learned it about putting it in the bosom. Before we mentioned it a few times.
Atfe, bosom. Bosom is a, yeah.
That's
bosom is an English word. It's a word in English.
In English? Okay. Shkoyach. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I maybe I don't understand the basics, but I've been pondering this the whole time. It seems like we're using the word gevura two completely different ways. I mean, you can have like the way we learned gevura is like you're restraining this and that, and all of a sudden it becomes the word passion, and then it's applied to even chesed, like water that's wild. I mean, any way you want to look at it. But now, it
so I
seems
believe
like
I explained. I believe I explained.
I did, yeah, but I didn't understand. I remember.
I believe I explained this yesterday in
it wasn't
detail.
Good enough for me. I don't know for some reason.
Do you remember what I said?
Yeah, you said because usually gevura is much more has much more passion than like fire. You explained it, yeah.
I explained what gvura means from the root. the power to restrain, the power to conceal, the power of din and judgment is all coming from an intense place. For God to conceal energy takes more intensity than for God to reveal. That's what I explained. So the real meaning of Gvura has many different meanings, but it all comes from intensity. There's a certain intensity involved. It's the intensity either of restraining or of concealing or judging. So it all takes on different meanings. There's nothing wrong with that. Chesed is like water flows. Chesed is about a flow of kindness and love. That's what chesed means. Gvura has the opposite: withholding, restraining, concealing, which also includes judgment and din. So there's judgment and din as in even destructively. There's also the intensity of Gvura that creates an intense love. And it's all coming from the same intense energy. So intensity can go in many directions. You can be intensely withholding, you can be intensely transmitting. That's more or less what I explained.
It's still okay. I know that.
You have to go back to who. What's your definition of Gvura? I defined it now as intensity. What's your definition? If you have the wrong definition, then obviously you're not going to relate to this. What's your definition of Gvura?
Okay, before this, we always defined Gvura.
No, it's not correct. No. What do you mean always? Who's this always? Not
maybe
Chassidus.
Maybe me in my head. I can't.
No.
I don't quite understand it.
In some places, it's defined that way. But if you learn different places, Gvura is defined in different ways. For example, do you know the connection between Gvura and Yira? What's Yira? This also comes from Gvura, right?
Yeah.
What is Yira?
We learned in Tanya just now Yira law, or I think yesterday.
Okay, so you see, Yira doesn't just mean fear. Yira is a very powerful force. It could be awe, it could be reverence, it could be respect, it could be a sense of mystique. So just Ava is a sense of closeness and an attachment, and Yira is a sense of distance. So you see from that, it's more than just Gvura, as in, okay, a person has Gvura, he's a very aggressive person. That's one definition, aggressive person, aggression. But aggression also, if you think about it, can be aggressive love. You can be very aggressive in giving love, and you can be very aggressive in being very angry, like we learn now. So when you really dissect the concept, you can see it can go in many different directions. Fire is necessary to keep things warm, but fire could also be tremendously destructive.
And waves, and it's Tsumi. I mean, I haven't got the whole thing yet. Okay, I'll think about it some more. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? That's it. No one wants to ask anything?
I have a question, but I'll ask after you end the video.
Okay, so we'll stop here, the end of paragraph, the middle paragraph.